Hey guys, welcome back to my AFL 2020 fixture request. I last left off in round 10, which was Sir Doug Nicholas round. Just one fixture change I want to make. Round 9, I said Melbourne and Fremantle would play at TIO Stadium. I found out, I read an article the other day that Melbourne cancelled their contract to play games in Darwin. So I relocated that game back to the MCG. And that makes more sense for travel reasons as well. And there will be another game which will be in Darwin, which will be a Gold Coast home game. Note, it will say Metricon Stadium because I didn't edit the graphics, but I'll let you know when it comes to it. Anyway, so I'm going to start off from round 11 and enjoy the rest of the fixture. So, round 11, the first thing you might notice is that there's a Monday afternoon match between the Eagles and the Bulldogs. Well, that's because it's WA Day where I live, and I feel that there should be an AFL match to celebrate the holiday, because, let's face it, there's public holidays matches for Anzac, Queen's Birthday, Easter Monday, but they're all in Victoria. You realise the AFL, it's around Australia, not just about Victoria. WA needs games too. They have public holidays. So that's why I put West Coast in their marquee slot for a WA Day match against the Dogs at Optus Stadium. 3:20 starting time is correct. The reason is so basically people in Victoria, because they're working during the day, they can come home and watch the last 3 quarters of that match, which will start at 5:20 on 7 May. Now, it'll probably be on 7 May because Channel 7 is telecasting the news, which is at 6, and the two shouldn't clash. And I think that will be the first of several instances where it's being played on 7 May, the others because of the Olympics. Also, on the Sunday, the previous day, is the Saints and the Power play in China, Jingguan Stadium. Now, it's in yellow because it shares the same time zone as WA. It doesn't really matter, though. Starts at 1:20. I know it said, an article said it starts at 2:40, but, I mean, it should be 1:20 because it should be televised on free-to-air. So, I'm disputing that, and I'm saying, nah, it should be at 1:20. Purely because of, to broadcast it on free-to-air television. And besides, it's not that early, so I don't know why. And also on Friday night, Richmond and Hawthorn play at the MCG. Those are some of the highlights for this round. So, round 12, for the second year in a row, Geelong and Richmond kick off the Queen's Birthday round at the MCG on a Friday night, where, as usual, Melbourne and Collingwood face off in the Queen's Birthday slot on a Monday afternoon. Now, as you noticed, there are 8 rounds in round 12. It's the first of 4 bye rounds. Now, I decided that because it's the Queen's Birthday round, I think 8 games should be played. So the only 2 teams that actually have a bye are the 2 teams that played in China last week, and those are St Kilda and Port Adelaide. Meanwhile, the other 16 teams will play in that special round. The Eagles and the Dogs, yeah, they play. I had them to play on the Sunday. Now, because the other 2 bye slots were used up for Saints and the Power, I thought they might actually just have to play on the Sunday, use up a 6-day break, which is why both teams play in the Sunday slots. Meanwhile, on the Saturday afternoon, the 2:35 match between Fremantle and Carlton at Optus Stadium will be delayed to 5:35 on free-to-air broadcasting in WA. Round 13 will pretty much share the same format as round 12, except because 14 teams are playing, I had to omit 1 slot, and that will be the Monday 3:20 slot because, well, that was only used because of the public holiday. Apart from that, the games are played in the exact same time slots as the previous week. Brisbane play Richmond on a Friday night match, in which will be Brisbane's first Friday night match since 2013. Meanwhile, due to restrictions, with West Coast, Western Bulldogs, GWS and North Melbourne all having byes, the other 2 you'll find out why, and I think the first 2 you know why. I had to have Collingwood and Melbourne restricted to play on the Sunday in this round. As you can see, Melbourne play Essendon at the G, whilst Collingwood play St Kilda at Marvel Stadium, despite the fact it's a Collingwood home game, but they do play 2 matches in Marvel Stadium a year at home. So I used up one of those 2 slots there. Rounds 14 and 15 will see a reduction in another match, plus a Thursday match will be introduced for those next 2 rounds. Well, actually next 4, but... So that means 2 time slots had to be omitted, and those were the Saturday 5:40 and Sunday 4 o'clock slots. 6 teams will have a bye in rounds 14 and 15, and no games clash on Foxtel. Well, no games clash in general. Thursday night sees North Melbourne play the GWS Giants in what will be the first ever Thursday night match in Tasmania. Now, remember when I said in the last video that, well, there's a Tassie side that might be coming soon, and we need to prepare for that and give Tasmania a few extra good slots. Yeah, this is what I was referring to. A Friday night match has already been used in Tassie, so I didn't use it this year, but I might do next year. But I thought it'd be good to have a Thursday night match, and also because I needed North and the Giants to play a Thursday night match somewhere, so I thought just use those 2 in Tassie. Meanwhile, Carlton returned to the Friday night lights because of their improved performance in the second half of last season, which should suggest that they'll be one of the big improvers this year. They'll be playing the Bulldogs, who, like Carlton, also had a really good second half of the season. Slightly better because they actually did make the 8 compared to Carlton. And I think both teams will be the big improvers. And I think that's why I put them on the Friday night at Marvel Stadium. Also note, like the last 2 games, I know at the moment, during the bye rounds, there is no Sunday match televised on free-to-air television. I don't know why, and I find that stupid. So I think rounds 12 to 15 will see all Sunday televised, in my opinion. And so just saying Adelaide Essendon, like Essendon Melbourne and the North Bulldogs matches, will be on free-to-air. Round 15 sees Sydney and Richmond, who have come off byes, play at the SCG on a Thursday night. Now, I know Sydney did slide last year, but I do think that a Thursday night match in Sydney is required, and a Thursday night match at the SCG with Sydney will be a lot higher attended than a Thursday night match at Spotless with the Giants. So I thought Sydney and Richmond, that'll be a good attended and good rating match, and so that's why I put them on Thursday night. Whilst on Friday night, North Melbourne and Collingwood play at Marvel Stadium. Like I said in the last round, the Dogs and the Dockers will be televised on free-to-air television for the Sunday game. However, in WA, it will be delayed 3 hours. So WA viewers will view that game at 4:20 p.m. on Channel 7. The other thing to note is that there is a Sydney and GWS home game. That's because of a few errors that were made during the bye rounds, and I was kind of quartered in to do that. And so that's why I made GWS. I located that game at Monica Oval. I thought it's better to have a game in Sydney and a game in Canberra in the same round than to have 2 games in Sydney. And I've seen GWS Melbourne games being played in Canberra before. So yeah, that's why I decided to put GWS and Melbourne in Canberra, despite the fact it's round 14 and some could say it's a bit too early to play the 3rd game in Canberra. Coming off a bye, Geelong and Adelaide will kick off round 16 at GMHBA Stadium on a Thursday night. On Friday night, a few people might be raising questions about this Friday night match, Carlton and West Coast. I was actually trying my hardest to make it Richmond and West Coast, to be completely honest with you. But due to Carlton not being able to play any other team in that round, I was kind of forced to have Carlton play West Coast. West Coast was a requirement to play on a Friday night because they play on the Thursday the next week. So I was kind of forced to have Carlton and West Coast play on the Friday night. To be honest, Carlton should improve next year, so I don't think it would be as bad. even if such game was actually played. As I said, this isn't the actual AFL fixture, so I mean, the AFL will do probably something completely different. But to be honest, even last year there was a Carlton West Coast match on free-to-air, albeit on a Sunday, so I don't know. But I thought just I kind of had to put Carlton West Coast in that slot. Don't worry, they don't play anymore for the rest of the year. I'm referring to Carlton. Gold Coast and Essendon. That game says will be played at Marvel Metricon Stadium at 7:40 p.m. That was before the announcement that Melbourne would stop playing games in Darwin and Gold Coast would start. So I think I know what I'm about to say. That game will be instead played at TIO Stadium at 7:10. So Geelong played 2 straight matches on Thursday night, and they travelled to play West Coast, who had just come off a Friday night match at Optus Stadium in a Thursday night match in WA. On the Friday night, we'll see Collingwood and GWS face off at the MCG in a preliminary final rematch where GWS upset Collingwood by 4 points to advance into the grand final. Meanwhile, on the Saturday 1:45 slot, the Bulldogs will play Brisbane in Ballarat. It'll be the Bulldogs' second match of the year in Ballarat, and it'll be their last for the season, by the way. And that had to be played in the early slot because, well, the lighting in that Eureka Stadium is pretty poor, so it has to be played in full daylight, that match. Meanwhile, in the early Sunday slot, Adelaide and Richmond will play at 12:40 at Adelaide Oval, which will be delayed on Adelaide free-to-air television to 3:40 p.m. Rounds 18 to 20 will be affected by the Tokyo Summer Olympics, which means that it is likely that some games will have to be televised on 7 Mate rather than the main 7 channel. Bulldogs and Hawthorn are especially affected by this because it clashes with the opening ceremony. I thought for consistency reasons still play the Friday night match, but I do feel that that match should be played on 7 Mate rather than the main 7 channel that it usually is on, so that the main 7 channel could televise the Tokyo opening ceremony. There'll be other games which will be affected and might have to be telecasted on 7 Mate as well over the next 3 rounds. Now, I know some of you are raising your eyebrows when you see that St Kilda are playing yet another match at Westpac Stadium in Wellington. Well, in my opinion, the AFL might disagree, but in my opinion, the AFL should focus more on improving their spectacle in New Zealand than China. And to be honest, the distance isn't that far. It's a 3-hour flight. In fact, you don't even have to have a bye the next round. So, really, I think Saints and the Roos should travel to Wellington to play a round 18 match on a Sunday afternoon, which will be televised on free-to-air. Yeah, I don't think no more than 2 matches should be televised, and it might be a little bit less. There might be less people attending because it's not on Anzac Day and it is on a late Sunday slot, but I think it'll be better than a China match, that's for sure. They'll get at least 15,000. In addition, people might think St Kilda are doing too much travelling. No, not really, because West Coast and Fremantle have to travel 4-hour flights to Melbourne every 2 weeks. So, and St Kilda only have 8 flights, and most of them are like no more than 1-hour flights. There's only 3 where they only have 4 long flights, so they'll be alright, in my opinion. One game earlier, Richmond versus West Coast at Marvel Stadium. Yeah, because Richmond have to play a second match. Richmond played 2 a year at Marvel Stadium, and West Coast already played too many matches at the G, so yeah, I kind of had to relocate that one. That will be televised. In WA, they'll be televised on a 3-hour delay, so it's televised at 2:10. South Australian fans, get excited if I ever become the fixture manager of the AFL. Because the first thing I'm going to do is put the South Australian showdown on Friday night footy. In my opinion, it's important not only to show that match on free-to-air television in South Australia, where it's the biggest game of the year in that state, But it's also important to telecast it all over the country because it is an important match. It'd probably be as important as games like Collingwood and Essendon, Carlton and Richmond, Carlton, Essendon, Collingwood, Richmond and others. So in my opinion, that game should be played on the Friday night. Now, as you might see, Fremantle and West Coast, their games actually clash in real time, but don't worry for free-to-air viewers, West Coast and Essendon will be delayed on free-to-air television. Instead of it being shown at 2:35, it will be shown at 5:35 instead. And that's so the two don't clash on broadcast. Meanwhile, the Sydney Derby, which was televised on free-to-air television earlier in the year, will have its turn on Foxtel, and will be played in the late Sunday slot at Spotless Stadium. Meanwhile, Richmond and Collingwood will play their second match on a Saturday afternoon. Now, if you notice, the last 5 rounds are going to be rounds full of double ups. Just to make it easier for me, I decided to do it where all 18 teams play each other once in the first 18 rounds, plus 1 bye, and then each team plays 5 other teams that they've already played in the final 5 rounds of the season. And don't worry, I made it so all teams fit the wage rule at the same time, switching the grounds that they played from their earlier clash. Like last week where I televised the Adelaide Showdown on free-to-air on Friday night, I'm going to be televising West Coast and Fremantle on Friday night. I think it's also another very important match that should be shown throughout the country, and that's why I put that game on Friday night. Some will be skeptical about the 6:20 starting time, considering that people have to come back from work and then attend the game. Well, to be honest, it's 10 minutes later than last season, and even last season we were still able to get about 55,000 people coming to the ground in a 6:10 starting time. And believe it or not, 10 minutes is actually quite a bit of time, especially in Perth. It shouldn't be too much of an issue. And it worked in 2005, so it should work this year. Alright, yeah, okay, another 20,000 fans will be coming, but still, I think it should work. Like last round, Adelaide and Port Adelaide's games will be clashing. However, Port Adelaide will play Hawthorn. That game will be delayed on Adelaide television, free-to-air. And that game will be played at 7:05 instead on television. In addition, GWS and Richmond will be playing in the Saturday night slot on free-to-air, which will be the second of the grand final rematches. Whilst the Gold Coast Suns play Brisbane in the Q Clash in the late Sunday slot. I think you might notice that I was a little bit OCD with rounds 19 and 20, and let's see how many similarities you can spot between the two. Straight off the Q Clash and straight to Friday night. Brisbane play Geelong for the second time this year on a Friday night. This time at the Gabba. And they will play their second match of the year on a Friday night in Brisbane. Now, you remember when I said that I had to schedule a few matches at Icon Park due to the MCG and Marvel Stadium being taken up for other games? Well, this is what I'm talking about. A game at the MCG and Marvel on a Saturday, and a game at the MCG and Marvel on a Sunday. And I felt none of those 4 games were viable to move. The only one that was actually possible, well, the 2 of them were possible. Bulldogs and Richmond at Eureka, which is stupid, I'm not going to do that. And Hawthorn Melbourne in Launceston, which may be sort of reasonable because North have played Melbourne in Blundstone before, but I feel that a Hawthorn Melbourne match is a lot higher rating than a North Melbourne match. So I don't think that is viable to be moved to UTAS either, especially that Hawthorn have already played 4 matches in Launceston anyway. So I felt that out of those, the most viable match to be played at a smaller ground was Carlton and Adelaide, because it's against a side that's going to be tipped to struggle next year. And it's non-Victorian anyway, so I don't think that will have too much effect. Meanwhile, it's one of the rare times where both Freo and West Coast play on free-to-air in the same weekend, whilst Collingwood and West Coast play. So, funny enough, both the 2018 and 2019 grand final rematches will be played on free-to-air television, all 4 of them. That's interesting. Not sure when that's happened before. So, GWS play their first ever Friday night match at Spotless Stadium, where they take on Essendon in the round 22 Friday night slot. Meanwhile, on Saturday and Sunday, there's 2 matches at the G, 2 matches at Marvel Stadium, and a match at Icon Park. Now, I don't know where else you'd play Collingwood and Hawthorn and Richmond and Brisbane, which will be an intriguing match on free-to-air television. I don't know where you play those 2 matches, and I was never going to move Melbourne and St Kilda because St Kilda only played 1 match at the MCG before that point, so I think it's unfair if they only play the 1, so that's why I had Melbourne and St Kilda stay put, and I don't think North Melbourne and the Bulldogs will... I don't think that's a match to be played in Blundstone Arena. It's against 2 Victorian teams. I think the Roos are one of North Melbourne's bigger rivals. I'm not saying they're big rivals, but I mean probably one of their more important rivals, I'd say. And I think that'd be stupid to play in Tassie. So the most viable option is Carlton and Freo at Icon Park. I don't think Fremantle have any supporters in Melbourne, so I think that should be alright. For WA viewers, Fremantle will... For WA viewers, that game will be delayed on free-to-air telecast to 2:10 PM. Saints fans, you can breathe a sigh of relief. I put you and Collingwood on the last Friday night slot of the year. I basically chose those 2 sides. Saints, well, that's their first Friday night match of the year. Whilst Collingwood, that brings their total up to 5, and it'll be played at Marvel Stadium, Saints home game. Richmond and Carlton, well, they open the season, and those 2 teams will be playing the last game at the MCG for the home and away season. Obviously, finals will be played there, obviously, so it's not the last game of the year, but it'll be the last home and away game there. That's what I did. That was not intentional, to be honest with you. It just happened. It was a utter coincidence. Geelong and West Coast and Essendon and North Melbourne to play on the free-to-air slots for that round. Meanwhile, Port Adelaide and Melbourne, that game will be played at Adelaide Oval, obviously. And for South Australian viewers, that game will be delayed on free-to-air television to 3:40 PM. And to finish off the season, it's going to finish off in WA on a Sunday afternoon where Fremantle play... Yeah, Gold Coast, yeah. The last 2 teams expecting... Yeah, I know. Couldn't I choose 2 better teams? But to be honest, I wanted the season finisher to be played in WA. So that's why I put that game there. And that finishes off the 2020 home and away season. Now, if you're wondering why I scheduled the round 23 fixture, even though, like, the last 10 years they've kept it on a floating schedule, that's because I don't think it's necessary anymore now that we have that pre-finals bye. I mean, the only reason why that floating fixture was introduced in the first place was so that teams don't have a 5-day break jumping from Sunday to Friday the next week. But now that the pre-finals bye exists, I don't think that is necessary anymore. And besides, I think, like last year, for example, I think it was going to be inevitable that Collingwood and Essendon were going to be playing on the Friday night at the MCG. I mean, it doesn't take a 3-year-old to guess that. So, I don't think it's necessary anymore, and that's why I think it should just be scheduled anyway. Now, I think the pre-finals bye is a good idea. I used to hate it due to consistency reasons, but then I thought about it. It makes it easier to schedule VFL finals matches. In my opinion, during that pre-finals bye match, all 4 VFL finals should be played on free-to-air television, a Friday, Saturday afternoon, Saturday night, and Sunday afternoon. Meanwhile, for Watford and Sandford, they only need to televise 2. They can sort it out amongst themselves, which slots are televised. But yeah, I think most importantly, VFL need all 4 of those slots. And I think all 4 of them should be televised on free-to-air television in their respective states. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to watch a VFL match in WA, for example. Finals week 1, I think Thursday night match should be there, Friday night match, Saturday twilight match. Now, last year was a Saturday afternoon, whilst the first 3 years it was Saturday twilight. I think it should be Saturday twilight, 4:20. That way, a VFL, Sandford, Waffle, whatever, final can be played in the 1:20 slot. whilst that 4:20 slot can be used for AFL. News will start at 7 o'clock, go through till about 8 o'clock, and then hopefully the match is played in WA, South Australia, and play that at 8:10 Eastern Time. If not, just play it at 7:50 and end the news like 10 minutes early. And then on the Sunday of that weekend, a WAFL, VFL, or SANFL Grand Final could be played. Not Grand Final, sorry. And so semi-finals, Friday night match and Saturday night match. And the Sunday slot could be used for WAFL, SANFL, and VFL finals. And the Saturday afternoon slot for one of the VFL games, in my opinion. And then preliminary final round, a match on Friday afternoon, a match somewhere in Saturday. Now, if it's two Victorian teams, I think it should be played on the Saturday night. Or two teams that are from the same state, actually, should be played on the Saturday night. If it's a Victorian team and another non-Victorian team, or if it's two non-Victorian teams from different states, that doesn't include WA, I think it should be Saturday twilight. Meanwhile, if it includes a WA side, unless if it's a West Coast Fremantle match, it should be played on the Saturday afternoon. Meanwhile, on Sunday afternoon will be a VFL, SANFL, or WAFL Grand Final. On the last Saturday of September will be the Grand Final. Now, the big question, what's my opinion? Should it be played at 2:30 or 4:30? It depends. If it's between two Victorian teams, it should be played at 2:30. If it's between two non-Victorian teams, it should be played at 4:30. If it involves a WA team, it should definitely be at 4:30 so that it's easier for WA viewers to watch it. Now, if it involves one Victorian team and one non-Victorian team, you've got to really consider it whether you've got to think of it as if it was a normal season match. Would you consider it to be a high rating slot? I mean, for example, Adelaide and Collingwood, or Adelaide and Essendon, for example, or Sydney and Essendon. You think of that as a traditional type game, and you'd put that on the Saturday afternoon. But I mean, like, you wouldn't put, let's say Fremantle and St Kilda, for example. I'm just plucking out random examples here. You wouldn't really put that on a high rating slot. You'd put that on a Saturday twilight or something. That is when I feel teams matchups like that, like St Kilda or Freo. Well, actually, Freo, as I said, definitely should. But St Kilda and GWS, for example, I think more realistic to put that on a Saturday twilight. If it involves Gold Coast, which it won't, but let's say it will. Again, realistically, you should put it on the Saturday twilight. It really depends on the tradition of the matchup. More traditional matchups should be played on the 2:30 slots. Less traditional matchups, more modern matchups, as well as all West Coast and Fremantle matchups should be played at 4:30. So that's my take on it. And that is my AFL 2020 fixture request. Now, the AFL will probably do something a lot different to mine, but really I did this just as a hobby, just because I like doing this kind of stuff, and just because I thought, hey, well, let's just send it to the AFL, see what I can do. But anyway, I hope you like this video. I hope you like this fixture request. Comment what you think of my fixture down below, and also comment on other video ideas that I should do. Please like this video, please subscribe, and check out my other videos. And if you happen to watch this video before my other video, the link to part 1 is down below, as well as my AFL Women's fixture request video. That's also down below. Anyway, I'll see you next week. Bye.